Good evening, and welcome to the Louis D. Brandeis Center for Human Rights Under Law and our special evening with Special Envoy Elan Carr. We founded the Louis D. Brandeis Center nearly a decade ago. Next month will be the start of our 10th year, fighting anti-Semitism and advancing the civil and human rights of the Jewish people and promoting justice for all. For nearly that whole time, an important component of our work has been education for law students. And that was partly at the request of undergraduates who told us that in many cases, what they needed on their campus was support, not just from lawyers in Washington, D.C., but also from law students who would be equipped and trained to support them. And so we have on chapters around the United States and through our Jigsaw Law Student Fellowship Program, opportunities for law students to receive training and to work shoulder to shoulder with Louis D. Brandeis Center lawyers. In addition to the training that we provide, we also have education on a host of topics. It's usually at each campus, face-to-face, person-to-person, but during COVID, we are doing remote programs like this one. Tonight is a particularly special occasion, and we have not only our students, but also some additional friends of the Louis D. Brandeis Center joining us as well. I'm going to introduce our speaker in just a moment. He'll have an opportunity to speak. We'll have a bit of a panel discussion afterwards, and then there'll be opportunities for questions. At any time, you can provide your questions through the Q&A section, and I would encourage you to do that. And let's see what we have opportunity to discuss then. Now, tonight is a really special occasion. We've been looking forward for some time to have this opportunity to speak with Elan Carr. The special envoy has been a friend of mine for many years. When I first met him, he was the international president of the Jewish fraternity Alpha Epsilon Pi. And I found him to be an extraordinarily active, effective, and eloquent lay leader of that organization. He was and is someone who has uniquely combined both advocacy for Americans and really solid work securing the safety of Americans, as well as public service for the Jewish community. He is a highly decorated veteran and officer in the U.S. Army, having spent 20 years in service. He is an experienced former prosecutor, an attorney who has dealt with both civil and criminal law, someone who has been not only the international president of AEPI, but a member of the Conference of Presidents of Major Jewish American Organizations, a member of the National Council of AIPAC, someone in short who has done extraordinary work over a period of many years for America and Americans, and also in particular for Jewish Americans. It is really an honor to speak with him now during his tenure as Special Envoy. We have had, in my opinion, the great good fortune over many years to have had a series of strong special envoys in both parties. I'll be interested to hear Special Envoy Carr's view, but my thought is the following. I believe, Special Envoy Carr, that you are the fourth of our special envoys to monitor and combat global anti-Semitism. Greg Rickman, during the George W. Bush administration, established that office and issued 2 reports on global anti-Semitism that I think have been immensely helpful for many years after that. Hannah Rosenthal, during the Obama administration, was influential in establishing the State Department's working definition on anti-Semitism during the Obama-Biden years, a definition which very closely tracked the so-called IRA definition. That was an incredibly important move. Ira Foreman, later in the Obama years, was very much a friend of the Louis D. Brandeis Center and spoke to our law students. I don't know if there's a Guinness Book of World Records for traveling in the position, but he was an extraordinarily energetic traveler going around the world, bringing the diplomatic message about anti-Semitism. So your predecessors, I believe, in both parties have in different ways contributed greatly. But I think what you've done, Special Envoy Carr, has really been extraordinary in the way that you have elevated the office of the Special Envoy within the administration, within the White House, within the United States and around the world, and the extraordinary eloquence with which you have explained the importance both of the United States and of foreign countries of working forcefully and effectively to combat this resurgent evil. Having worked with Elan Carr in the White House and been with him in meetings, I can say that Elan Carr has commanded extraordinary respect within the administration at the highest levels, and in that way has been able to be effective at influencing a very significant change and very significant accomplishments, certainly internationally, but also having headed the U.S. Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights. I'm also grateful for the extraordinary role that he played in helping to ensure an executive order that has been extraordinarily important for combating anti-Semitism in higher education. So while I think we've had others who've done great work in that position, I think that as Americans, we should be deeply grateful to Elan Carr, both for his service over many years to America and to the Jewish community, but also in particular for the work that he has done during this administration at raising and elevating the already important position and really doing extraordinary work to fight anti-Semitism all around the world. So I am deeply honored to be able to introduce to the Louis D. Brandeis Center law students and friends, Special Envoy Elan Carr.
Well, thank you, Ken, and I'm so glad this is being recorded because that is the nicest introduction I've ever gotten. And to get that from you means a great deal because, like you said, we're personal friends and we have been for quite some time, but also your work, and now if I may repay the compliment, I talked about you all the time, and I said many times that one of President Trump's best appointments is you as Assistant Secretary for Civil Rights. You just couldn't have a better ally for the Jewish people and for Jewish students. In some cases, as you know, Ken, besieged Jewish students couldn't have a better ally and a better friend and a better leader than you. So first of all, kol hakavod to you and all of your great work on behalf of our country. And I know now with the Brandeis Center, the sky is the limit on the impact that you and Eliza and the great team at the Brandeis Center will make. I'm such a fan of this organization. I have to tell you, it's really a pleasure to see the work that you do, work that is impactful and that produces results, work that really rescues kids who are willing to stand up and take a lot of heat, and you give them the legal firepower to stand up and wage those battles and win those battles, as they often do, largely because of your support. So I'm just thrilled to be here, and I can't thank you enough for having me. And even more important than that is I can't thank you enough for all of the work that you do, you, Ken, and you, Elisa, and the great team at Brandeis. So thank you. And I'm especially honored to be able to talk about our work against anti-Semitism tonight on the last night of Hanukkah, a holiday that is all about defeating anti-Semitism. Remember that, the anti-Semites of yesteryear, 2,200 years ago, overthrew Jewish sovereignty, overthrew the city of Jerusalem, defiled the temple, and attempted to prevent the Jewish people from living a Jewish life in the Jewish homeland. And we celebrate today and still celebrate 2,200 years later the victory of those brave partisans who waged that battle and stood against what seemed to be insurmountable odds. And today we are asking no less than that of these great Jewish kids on campus who are willing to stand up and be proud of who they are, and that's saying a lot. And so it's a privilege to be talking about this fight that we have against the world's oldest hatred. 2 years ago, Ken, as you said, I was appointed by President Trump and Secretary Pompeo to lead America's fight against this recurring, indefatigable hatred, this human sickness that is anti-Semitism. And I took this appointment at a time of rising anti-Semitism. It's rising from the far right, those anti-Semites that these are the active, the synagogue shooters and the anti-Semites of vile internet chat rooms. These are the anti-Semites of ominous torchlit marches at night from which we thought we had graduated years ago. And we've seen anti-Semitism rising from that camp. We also see anti-Semitism rising from the far left. These are the haters who focus their attention on Jewish peoplehood, on Jewish self-determination, and on the state of Israel. And as you know better than anyone, that brand of anti-Semitism lives most notoriously, most publicly, and most effectively on university campuses, among other places. And we've seen anti-Semitism rise as well from militant Islamism, the chief source of violence against the Jews of Western Europe. It's the reason why, after a speech, when I emerged from a synagogue on Shabbat, on Erev Shabbat in Paris, I was told, take your kippah off. You shouldn't walk the streets of Paris with a kippah. And I won't pass judgment on whether that's good advice or not, on whether, Jewish residents of Paris should or should not be afraid. I'm not going to pass judgment on that. But the fact that a Jewish congregant at a synagogue in Paris today should feel that level of fear says it all. And so anti-Semitism has been rising from three diverse intellectual camps: the far right, the radical left, militant Islam, that find unity. These three diverse, drastically different ideological camps find unity when it comes to Jew hatred. And I would argue also share common tactics, and that is using the powerful communicative tools of our day, the internet and social media, to drive their hate-filled ideologies with unprecedented speed and with global reach. And so that is the milieu in which we find ourselves today. So the question is, what are we doing about it? What is the United States doing to secure the Jewish future and to protect the Jewish people? Let me go through a few lines of effort that have really driven our work over these past 2 years, and I very much hope will drive the work of my successors. First and foremost, we've focused on physical safety, because physical safety is job one. It's the most important promise a sovereign makes to its citizenry. And as you know, if you don't feel safe, if you can't leave your home and know that you'll come back in one piece, or put your kids or grandkids on a school bus and know that they're protected, you cannot have quality of life. And so we focused on physical safety, ensuring that every Jewish community in the world is protected. We've worked with our allies and our partners to make sure that they've devoted sufficient resources and sufficient budgets to make sure that Jewish communities are protected and are physically safe. Second of all, hate crimes. Ken, you mentioned I'm a former prosecutor. I've actually prosecuted hate crimes. And I know from personal experience how important it is that the government and that law enforcement makes the statement that a crime committed with ethnic or religious hatred as a motive is worse, is more offensive and more worthy of blame than a crime committed for other purposes. And so it is so important that hate crimes be aggressively investigated, prosecuted, and appropriately punished. I worked with law enforcement leaders from 7 separate German states, came together to discuss best practices in prosecuting hate crimes. I met with law enforcement leaders in jurisdictions around the world, including right here at home. I led a delegation that included the Attorney General of New Jersey to visit the horrific scene of the murders in Jersey City. I met with prosecutors in Lakewood and in Ocean County, Bergen County, to talk about how we can effectively prosecute hate crimes. And it's so important that we do that, because very often the first signs of radicalization are seen by law enforcement, by police and prosecutors. Maybe it's a low-level crime. Maybe it's a trespass. Maybe it's not even related to anti-Semitism. It's a skinhead shoplifting a beer. But sometimes And I've seen it happen. This is the best possible time and the best chance we have to intervene in the life of a young kid who's being radicalized. And too many young kids are being radicalized all over the world. So I've often been asked by law enforcement leaders, well, what can we do when it's a minor? What can you do with a minor? Or it's a misdemeanor, it's a low-level crime. What can you do? And the answer is there's a lot you can do. There's a lot you can do, even when there isn't a lot of teeth on the prosecution. You can offer, for example, to close a case in exchange for a kid undergoing a tolerance program. I've done that many times and I've seen it work. And so you've got to grab onto these opportunities when you're given them and intervene in the life of a young kid. It's the best favor that we not only can do for society, but the best favor we can do to them to make sure they're on the right path. So hate crimes are critically important, and we've addressed them. Third, the IRA definition of anti-Semitism is critically important. How can you confront a threat effectively unless you define the threat? And we have a vehicle. It's an excellent vehicle for defining that threat. Ken, you mentioned it. It was the State Department definition that became very closely tracked the IRA definition. Well, more and more countries around the world are adopting the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism. If a country hasn't, it's my top diplomatic ask that they do so. Argentina did so most recently. Kosovo, Muslim majority country, adopted it by executive action. Albania, another Muslim majority country, adopted it by formal parliamentary action. I'm proud to say that I negotiated and executed an agreement with the Kingdom of Bahrain, the King Hamad Global Center for Peaceful Coexistence, an agreement that was groundbreaking in that it pledged to combat together all forms of anti-Semitism, including anti-Zionism and the delegitimization of the State of Israel. Unprecedented for an Arab entity to sign on to language like that, also unprecedented. Our agreement with Bahrain adopts and uses the IRA definition. Again, the first Arab entity to do so. And right after we did that, the Global Imams Council, the largest NGO of Muslim faith leaders, adopted the IRA definition of anti-Semitism unanimously. Let me tell you why IRA is so important. Because in the examples it gives, it not only captures traditional forms of anti-Semitism, Jews controlling the world or responsible for any number of problems, ominous agents of every pathology a society has, but it also captures the more contemporary type of anti-Semitism that targets Jewish peoplehood, Zionism, and the State of Israel. And so examples given by the IRA definition for contemporary manifestations of anti-Semitism: denying the Jewish people's self-determination by claiming that the existence of the State of Israel is a racist endeavor, given as an example of anti-Semitism. Comparing Israel to Nazi Germany, an example. Targeting Israel as a Jewish collectivity, given as an example. Or subjecting the State of Israel to a double standard not demanded of any other democracy in the world, given as an example of anti-Semitism. This is critically important. It's a game changer. And it's so important that it's adopted. And let me say this, it has nothing to do with a violation of freedom of expression. This is the favorite complaint of anti-Semites. Every time you try to call out anti-Semitism or define it, they'll say, well, I have freedom of speech. What does that have anything to do with it? The Nazis had a right to march in Skokie. That's a Supreme Court opinion. That doesn't mean that they're not anti-Semites, and it doesn't mean that we can't condemn them for being anti-Semites. Of course we can do that. And so don't be fooled. Don't let anyone tell you this fraud that they perpetrate, that somehow adopting a definition of anti-Semitism is a violation of anyone's free speech rights. You know what? Anti-Semites have the freedom of speech to spout their vile anti-Semitism. We have the free speech rights to condemn it and to call it what it is, and don't be fooled. So the IRA definition has been a key part of what we've done. Another focus is the internet and social media. I said it at the beginning, the internet and social media is the chief driver of anti-Semitism. It is the reason anti-Semitism has been rising. When you look at the rise for the last 15 years of anti-Semitism, it tracks precisely the influence of the internet and social media in our lives. And that's to be expected. Because today, as we know, a hater can sit in a dim lit basement somewhere and with a few clicks drive their ideology around the world, potentially developing followers in the hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands around the world. And that's why this is so urgent. A recent European study found that the period of time it takes to radicalize a person to violence, actually to act violently, is a fraction of the time when that radicalization is done online as opposed to traditional offline means. And so here now we have data that there are real consequences to this tsunami of hate that we see on the internet and social media. And so I'm proud to say that 2 months ago, my team convened and broadcast the first ever US government-sponsored conference focused on combating online anti-Semitism. Never been done before. And we hope this is a first step, because the fact that we are champions of the First Amendment, that we value free speech, and that means even despicable, vile, hateful speech is protected, doesn't mean that we can't counter this deluge of online hate. And counter it we must, because the security of our kids depends on it. I'm proud to say that our conference has already made a difference. We had a social media panel with senior executives from Facebook and TikTok. And during that social media panel, we discussed Holocaust denial. I'm proud to say that Facebook took the very suggestion made to them in that panel. Right after we taped that panel, Facebook announced that it will now regard Holocaust denial or distortion as anti-Semitism. What's more, they adopted the First Amendment compliance suggestion we made to them. And that is that they will be referring their users to credible off-platform sources of information where they can learn about the Holocaust, thereby using these platforms to educate and elevate in the spirit of the First Amendment, meeting hateful speech with healthy, uplifting, elevating speech. That's the suggestion we made to Facebook, and that's exactly what they decided to do. I'm proud to say our conference has already begun to make a difference. Campuses has been a key focus for us. Now, I don't have to tell the Brandeis Center how important this is. On too many campuses, Jewish students are under siege, harassed, discriminated against, marginalized, and really made to feel unsafe. The complaints I hear from Jewish student leaders in the United States, and I've heard them for years in my role in AEPI, leading 10,000 students on 190 campuses. I've heard those complaints for years, but now in my role as special envoy, I'm hearing the same complaints from Jewish student leaders in the UK and in France. And what they're saying is that if you want to be safe as a Jewish student on campus, if you want to go unmolested through your campus, you have got to divorce yourself completely from any connection to the state of Israel, to Jewish peoplehood. You certainly can't say anything favorable about the Z word, Zionism. Woe to you should you express that part of your Jewish identity. Well, let me tell you, making a Jewish kid or making any Jew choose between safety and their identity, well, there's a word for that. It's called anti-Semitism. That's the word for that. That's what it is. And that's what's going on too many campuses throughout the world. And I'm proud to say we're standing up against that as well. And lastly, I saved this for last, because if you notice, all of these measures I've outlined are inherently defensive. Physical safety, condemnation, hate crimes, countering hate. That's all defensive. And that's appropriate, because anti-Semitism is a hateful onslaught, and you must defend against hateful onslaughts. But as we know, you can't win a war. You can't even win a sports game if all you do is play defense. You've got to also go on the offense. Now, how do you go on the offense against anti-Semitism? Well, the most exciting line of effort we're engaged in is exactly that, to turn the tables on the fight against anti-Semitism and go on the offense by driving a philo-Semitic narrative and developing philo-Semitic curricula that breeds and inculcates an understanding of the Jewish people, the Jewish story, Jewish values, and those profound, indelible contributions of Jewish values to civilization and to every society that we're in. Can you tell the story of the United States without talking about Jewish contributions to our Declaration of Independence and Jewish contributions to the very mission and definition, the DNA of the United States? Can you tell the story of England or of France or Germany or Russia, Poland, Hungary without talking about Jewish history in these countries? Why don't we teach that to our kids? Why don't we champion those values? Because as we know, the opposite of anti-Semitism is intolerance. The opposite of anti-Semitism is philo-Semitism. Let me give you two examples. Next year, 2021, Germany will commemorate, are you ready for this? 1,700 years of Jewish history in Germany. 1,700 years. And so I worked with our German interlocutors to say, okay, let's give this year content. Not only a declaration in January from which we all move on, but let's start to talk about the curriculum that will be driven to every single classroom in every city in Germany, so that every kid knows that it's 1,700 years, and not only the number 1,700, but a little bit about the content of those years, the incredible contributions, the influence the Jewish people have on what Germany is, and vice versa. I asked the question in Germany, how many German kids know that the vernacular language of Ashkenazi Judaism from Russia to England is a form of German? How many kids know that? The answer is practically none. Why don't we teach that? That's how you teach pride. And by the way, that's how you make nationalism and ethnic pride compatible with philo-Semitism, by showing the connection between these peoples and these countries to the incredible history of the Jewish people in those countries. And now let's bring it home to the United States. Do you know that we have a month, Jewish American Heritage Month, declared by every president of the United States and endorsed by bipartisan Congresses for 40 years? Think about it, a period of time, a month, dedicated to doing exactly this, to championing, to celebrating the Jewish people and what the Jewish people have meant for America. What do we do about it? Not much. We all know about Black History Month, African American Heritage Month, because there are curricula, there are posters, there are public service announcements, there are orientations for teachers. What do we do for Jewish American Heritage Month? None of that. Now think about it. We have on a silver platter a vehicle for doing exactly this, for driving a philo-Semitic narrative in America. And we haven't done it. So I'm proud to say that just a few months ago in May, during Jewish American Heritage Month, we launched the Jewish Heritage Initiative exactly to champion that Jewish story and to drive a philo-Semitic narrative. So those are our lines of effort. Let me close before we have our panel. I understand we're going to have a panel. Let me close with a little bit of good news, because despite rising anti-Semitism, there is a lot of good news. A piece of good news number one is that we have incredible allies and partners around the world, leaders, non-Jewish, all of them, who get it, who understand that the fight against anti-Semitism is their fight. It's a fight for their countries and for their societies and for the future of their children. We couldn't have better allies. These aren't just partners. These are champions of this fight. Now I have the great privilege of working with them in, people like Lord Mann and Lord Pickles in the UK, Frédéric Poitier in France, Georg Georgiev in Bulgaria, Felix Klein in Germany. I mean, great leaders. Katharina von Schnurbein, who is the EU anti-Semitism coordinator and has been a game changer throughout Europe, an incredible champions of this fight. And it's the reason why we're winning so many fights in Europe. It's the reason why IRA is being adopted. It's the reason why the German Bundestag and the Austrian National Parliament passed measures saying that BDS is anti-Semitism. It's the reason why the UK Labour Party got shellacked in its election when it was hijacked by a cabal that trafficked in anti-Semitism. So these partners are incredible, and I have the great privilege of working with them. That's piece of good news number one. Piece of good news number two is that there is a state of Israel. The Jewish people do have self-determination. And the Jewish state is a model for the world of democracy and excellence, of freedom of religion and press, of world-changing innovation, defended by a military that is breathtaking in its strength, while at the same time committed to the law of armed conflict and purity of arms. And Israel's strength and excellence makes the Jewish people stronger everywhere in the world and better able to confront anti-Semitism. And finally, piece of good news number three is that despite rising anti-Semitism, the United States of America is still the most philo-Semitic country in history. All the polls show that's the case. And America today is led by the most philo-Semitic administration we have ever had. From President Trump to Vice President Pence to my boss, Secretary Pompeo, and so many others, we have never seen anything like this. And this administration is committed in unprecedented fashion to fighting for the Jewish people, to combating anti-Semitism, and to protecting and standing and supporting the state of Israel. We are the first administration ever to designate a violent white supremacist group as a terrorist organization. Never been done before. President Trump signed into law the Never Again Education Act to ensure that future generations of American kids are going to learn about the Holocaust and know where violent right-wing anti-Semitism leads. So we have taken on anti-Semitism from the right. When it comes to anti-Semitism from the left, President Trump, Ken, as you said, issued an unprecedented executive order last December that applies Title VI civil rights protection to Jewish kids on campus. And when he signed that order, I was at the White House, he looked at the cameras and he said, let me make this very clear. If you are a university and you're promoting the discrimination and harassment of your Jewish students, you are going to lose a lot of money. This is going to be very expensive for you. Now, I know there's not a single university president or chancellor who didn't read that message loudly and clearly. And how important it is that the Brandeis Center is stepping up to the plate and giving these kids exactly the tools they need to take advantage of the president's executive order so that they know their rights, so that they can exercise their rights, and if necessary, even exercising their rights through complaints brought to OCR. And so we've taken on anti-Semitism from the left. And when it comes to anti-Semitism from militant Islam that focuses on Israel, well, my goodness, no administration has ever stood with the state of Israel like ours. Whether it's recognizing Jerusalem as the eternal undivided capital of the Jewish people and moving our embassy there, recognizing Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights, defunding UNRWA so that our tax money doesn't go to printing vile, hate-filled textbooks, not with our money anymore, or defunding the Palestinian Authority's Pay for Slay program that pays a monthly stipend to murderers of innocent people, not with US tax money anymore. Whether it's walking out of the UN Human Rights Council for discriminating against Israel, or walking out of the disastrous, dangerous Iran nuclear deal. Whether it's recognizing historic Jewish claims in Judea and Samaria, recognizing that settlements aren't a violation of international law, or whether it's unveiling a peace plan that recognizes Jewish claims in those areas while at the same time paving a way for Palestinian statehood. And then, of course, most recently, the Abraham Accords, the dreams of peace that we've held for generations, a reality because of President Trump and his peace team negotiating breathtaking, historic agreements, first the UAE and Bahrain, then Sudan, and now Morocco most recently. Last night, I just returned from the Arab world. I was in the UAE and I was in Qatar. And we talked about Jewish life in these countries. Well, let me tell you what else we did. I attended a Chanukiah lighting ceremony and concert in Dubai. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The affection between peoples. This isn't a peace that's limited to a piece of paper. This is a peace between peoples, or an embrace by Arabs of Jews and by Jews of Arabs. This was a concert at the foot of the Burj Khalifa, the world's tallest building. And there, people gathered through blaring loudspeakers, singing songs of Hanukkah, but also songs of Israel. If I forget thee, O Jerusalem, im eshkechech Yerushalayim, sung loudly in the center, in the heart of Dubai, as Arabs looked on cheering. This is the world we have built, the world where we have secured the state of Israel as the Jewish state, the nation state of the Jewish people. And so piece of good news number 3 is that the United States of America stands with Israel like never before and fights anti-Semitism and supports the Jewish people. And I know that with partners like the Brandeis Center and partners like you, Ken, and you, Eliza, I know that we will build a better future. We will build tikkun olam b'malchut shaddai and bequeath to our children and grandchildren that better, more just future that they so richly deserve. Thank you for all that you do. Chanukah Sameach, and thank you for having me tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elan. I think
My pleasure to be with you.
there we go. Hey there. Thank you, Elan. That was really wonderful. You know, hearing you summarize so clearly both the challenges and the positive, inspirational advances is just, it's very exciting. It's exciting to hear what you've done, to hear the advancements. You know, when we talk about the adoption of the IRA definition and how you've made that such a priority, and what we've seen in terms of country after country adopting it, and particularly the Arab world. I mean, when you now talk about the Abrahamic Accords and the Arab countries recognizing it, I think, you know, that has been, there's been this sense that that probably is the biggest hurdle, right? If you could get the Arab countries to understand this form, this new contemporary form of anti-Semitism, which is what the IRA definition is all about, then what's with Europe, right? Why doesn't Europe understand it the same way?
Also, another thing, how can the BDS movement find its fuel? From where will it derive its engines when the Arab world isn't doing BDS? I mean, you know, in the UAE, they have markets, fruit markets, with Israeli flags. They're putting Israeli flags on Israeli products in their markets. I mean, it's if the Arab world isn't doing BDS, how much longer can the BDS movement live with these crazy student movements, or in these European, these West European, you know, far left movements? You know, it's not. I read a headline that said these Abrahamic Accords, this is the death of BDS. Now, I have to say, I think that's premature, but I do think that this is the beginning of the end, because it becomes almost impossible to explain and justify the idea that you should boycott the Jewish state when the very people for whom you purport to boycott the Jewish state aren't boycotting the Jewish state. And so it's really a remarkable time.
I actually think that what it does is it helps clarify what is the motivation behind the criticism and the boycott, right? Is the motivation, is the ultimate goal coexistence, right? If the ultimate goal is coexistence, then what you see from the countries like the UAE and Bahrain, they have not abandoned the Palestinians, but they have said that the way to reach peace and prosperity for all the people in the region is for us to normalize relations with Israel. It's for us to engage with Israel. It's for us to have this trade and business and exchange, and for us to get to know one another. That's the group that's really seeking coexistence. The group that doesn't seek coexistence, right? The group that says explicitly their goal is to destroy the one and only Jewish state, to wipe Israel off the map. That group, right, that is the terrorist groups, Hamas and Hezbollah and Iran, who say that explicitly. Those are the ones who still push for the anti-normalization and for the boycott of Israel. And so the question really, I think, is both for the Palestinians and for the students on campus and people around the world, which side of that equation are you on? Are you with the people that are looking for coexistence and that's their ultimate goal? Then you should be doing what the UAE and Bahrain are and say, we're all for normalization and engaging with Israel. Or are you really not for reforming the policies of the current government and trying to move forward and develop real coexistence, but your goal is really just to destroy Israel? Well, then that group are the terrorists, right? And is that where you're siding? Because that's what you're doing when you're pushing for BDS, for boycott, and for anti-normalization.
No question. And since when is boycotting and sanctioning and isolating a pathway to peaceful coexistence? I mean, since when? So this is obviously about Israel hatred. And as I said from my day one on the job, hatred of the Jewish state is hatred of the Jewish people. don't try to dress it up. It isn't even a fig leaf. It's transparent anti-Semitism. When people turn their hatred to the Jewish collective, to the presence in the world today of the nation state of the Jewish people, that is hatred of the Jewish people. And we've got to recognize that false distinction between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism is just that. It's a false distinction.
Elan, I'd like to thank you for your words today. Certainly the words about me, but more generally, your words today, your eloquence and your passion. It certainly makes me proud as an American to hear what you've been accomplishing and what's been accomplished over the last 4 years. I have a question for you. Towards the end of any administration, certainly the ones I've been a part of, even before the election, leading up to the election, one thinks about unfinished business. One asks the question.
Yes, we do.
Yeah. So you ask the question, suppose we have another 4 years, or suppose we don't have another 4 years, what is there left to be done? Now, when I listen to your recitation of the extraordinary things that have been done over the last 4 years, I mean, it really is quite amazing. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts of what should come next. What would you like to see being done to push the ball forward over the next 4 years in combating global anti-Semitism?
Well, I think certainly more of the same, right? More peace agreements with Israel, more countries adopting IRA, more local municipalities. It's not only countries. I mean, I helped author a letter. I signed onto a letter with all of my colleagues, anti-Semitism envoys and coordinators, that went to the top football clubs. Now, football, of course, is incredibly important. Even in the United States, it's getting important, but certainly in Europe and in Latin America. And there's a lot of anti-Semitism in sports. And so we're getting football clubs to adopt. Chelsea, Chelsea Football Club adopted it, and more are signing on. And this is incredibly important. I've done a lot of work with Chelsea, just to give you an idea of influence, anti-Semitism envoy, and all that. But listen to this. I mean, the Chelsea Football Club, they have a following on social media of 100 million people. 100 million. Now, do you know what it is when these icons stand up and say, hey, anti-Semitism, that's bad. It's unacceptable. Unacceptable in sports, unacceptable in life. Well, that's an earthquake. I mean, these are kids for whose posters are on the walls of kids all around the world. And so, that's how you really go to it. So it's IRA adoption. It's these initiatives. It's countering online hate. But I have to say, Ken, I think the piece of unfinished business I most regret is, I think, the most transformative, the one that has the potential to really change the game, and that is these philo-Semitism initiatives. We began it with Germany. We launched it here in the United States. We launched it with the Russian Jewish Congress, the philo-Semitism initiative in Russia. We've really been pushing this, but it's really the beginning. And this, I think, is so important on so many levels, because, in my first public appearance as envoy 2 years ago now, Rob Williams of the Holocaust Museum gave a great talk, and it was really deep. And he said, he kind of drilled down on anti-Semitism as ontologically. And he said, it really is about values. It's about the loss of values. And to fight anti-Semitism, we have to reclaim values. Because what is anti-Semitism? It's really a rejection of what the Jewish people are and what the Jewish people have brought to the world. That's what anti-Semitism is at its core level. And so these philo-Semitism initiatives are so important because, first of all, they turn the tables completely on what anti-Semitism is. You shout from the rooftops what the Jewish people are and what the Jewish people have brought to the world. You put anti-Semitism in its proper context, which is as a rejection of those contributions, right? There's always a danger if all you're doing is educating about anti-Semitism, then what are the Jewish people? I mean, you've reduced the Jewish people to victimhood and nothing more. The Jewish story is a lot more than being hated, right? It's a lot more. It's in fact, being hated is as disastrous as the hatred has been, is only a small part of what the Jewish people are and what Jewish history is. But then also for non-Jewish society, at a time when the values of our countries, even in America, is under assault, when people are tearing down the national narrative, how important is it now, more than ever before, to reclaim an appreciation of that narrative and those values? And by driving a philo-Semitic narrative, you're also talking about what your national story is, whether it's here in the United States or Germany and Russia. What is our national story, and what role have the Jews played in that national story? That is a win for everybody. It's a win for the country. It's a win for the non-Jews. It's a win for the Jews. And so I think if you talk about the strategic weapon against anti-Semitism, that's the strategic weapon. And we've just begun to scratch the surface of it. And so that's what I most regret not doing more of.
I would suggest, Elan, that you're absolutely right. But the philo-Semitic training has to be given not only to non-Jews about the Jews' contribution, but our own community needs to learn more about the Jewish contributions, because we need to really build up our own sense of Jewish pride, right? And we can only have that Jewish pride if we understand that the Jewish identity is, as you put it, so much more than an identity of victimhood, right? It's a really rich cultural heritage that we've inherited, and we need to be able to celebrate it. But to celebrate it, we have to know it.
Yes. And how amazing is it that in a single initiative, you can combat two dangers to the Jewish people: the external danger and the internal danger, the danger of assimilation and loss of identity and loss of continuity in the very same initiative. So it's a win for everybody. And I think that is that is the strategic weapon. And I would love to see us push that hard in the United States and overseas as well.
Good.
Could you, just today, there was that very disappointing European Union, the court that decided to uphold the rule that essentially outlaws kosher slaughter, or shchita, in Belgium today. So when an issue like that comes up, how does your office address something like that?
Well, we've been deeply engaged in this, actually. I didn't mention it as one of our key lines of effort. And the reason I didn't is because these appalling, and I'll call them that, appalling restrictions on Jewish life come not exclusively from a motivation of anti-Semitism, but from other motivations. Now, of course, in effect, they're anti-Semitic because they make Jewish life impossible in many cases. So in this particular domain of combating these laws that infringe on Jewish life, we work very closely with our Office of International Religious Freedom in the State Department, led by my dear friend, Ambassador Sam Brownback, who's just a wonderful man and a great leader. And so we work together on these issues, because this is as much a religious freedom issue as it is an anti-Semitism issue. In many cases, advocates of these laws are not anti-Semitic at all. But this really reflects where Europe has gone, and I'll say Western Europe mostly, because this is almost entirely Western Europe. It's almost entirely absent from Eastern and Central Europe, but this kind of contempt for religious identity, for religious practice, this view that human rights mean everything except the right to worship, and rank discrimination. I mean, very often these measures are anti-Arab and anti-Islamic, and their efforts to discriminate against Muslim populations, which is also appalling. And I'll tell you, I mean, to think that 75 years after the end of the Holocaust, a European country would have the audacity to outlaw Jewish religious life. I mean, how dare they? You're talking about the community. Several Jewish communities in Europe had a shortage of kosher meat during Pesach because of these bans. And now you can say, by the way, banning kosher slaughter, well, okay, it's terrible, but you can always import. Assuming that some countries allow it, you can import kosher meat. But let me tell you what they're discussing now. They're discussing actively. There is pending legislation to ban Brit Milah, circumcision. Now you can import kosher meat, but you can't export your 8-day-old to another country. And so let me tell you, this is a disgrace. Every single European, I hope they're watching, should be embarrassed by what's going on. And as I said in a speech I gave to a whole battery of media that was covering it, I said, let me make this very clear. Any country that enacts laws like this is in effect forcibly expelling its Jewish population. That's what this is. This is a forced expulsion of your Jewish population. So I say to Europe, when you talk about Europe without Jews isn't Europe, well, that's right. And if you really mean that, you have to stop making it impossible for Jews to live in Europe. And this is one of the ways that it is impossible for Jews to live in Europe. And so this ECJ decision yesterday is deeply disturbing. And I will say that the European Court of Justice went against the advice of its advocate general. The EU advocate general recommended that this law be overturned, and the court went against that advice. And so this is deeply troubling. And I think the United States needs to engage in a big way on this to protect Jewish life in Europe.
Elan, I love that you bring so much more boldness and candor to your work than I usually see from diplomats. And that brings me to a question that I think two members of the audience have just raised, which is what are the qualities that you would like to see in the next person to hold your position? And one of them asked specifically, is it important that they be a lawyer? Is it important that they, like you, also speak Arabic? What are the qualities that you would like to see in the next special envoy?
You know, that's a great question. You know, I don't think they need to be lawyers. I don't think they need to speak Arabic. But I think there's got to be a certain level of assertiveness. Because in diplomacy, it's very, very easy to be worn down by inertia. There is enormous inertia. There's inertia internally. The State Department's a big bureaucracy, and there is a lot of inertia against, bold action. I'm sure you experienced that in the Department of Education. And there's also inertia on the global stage. Margaret Thatcher once, she was being interviewed. I'll never forget this interview. And they said to her, well, there's, you acted against the advice of so-and-so, and, you did this and it was pretty aggressive and you had advice. And she interrupted the interviewer and says, let me explain to you how this works. There are a million reasons not to do something. And every time you want to do something, you'll have a long line of advisors who will tell you about the risks of doing it and will give you all sorts of reasons not to do it. That's what leadership means, that you take all of that into account, but then you're willing to stand up and do it. And that means when you make a decision, you look around the room and you say, this is my decision, now go do it. And everyone leaned back, that was Margaret Thatcher. Everyone, the interviewers all leaned back in the chair. But now I'm not a head of government, but there is a parallel. And the parallel is, you've got to understand what battles you want to pick. You've got to be smart about it. You can't go tilt at windmills. You can't go set fire to the world. But when it comes to critical issues, you've got to be bold and you've got to dog it. And you have to say, if this is important, I'm going to make it happen, and I'm going to fight like heck until it happens. Because otherwise you won't get anything done. You'll run out of time before you get anything done. And so that's critically important. This MOU we did with Bahrain, I can't tell you the number of people who said to me, well, we've never done anything like this before. Why, why do you need to do this? Why don't you do something else? I mean, do you really need to maybe take out language? Let's not rock the boat. This is pretty, you're kind of pushing them into a place that, this language is very, combating anti-Zionism and delegitimization of Israel. I mean, these are Arabs you're talking to, you have to be sensitive. And I said, listen, I am being sensitive. I expect them to join me in saying that delegitimizing the state of Israel is bad. That's not a heavy lift. And so, we asked it of them, and they signed it, and we're proud to sign it. And so, sometimes you have to understand what's important, and you have to understand what's not important, and because if everything's important, then nothing is, right? So you have to have good judgment in a job like this. And you also, you gotta be willing to stand up and be bold. And even Ken, you said it, sometimes undiplomatic. I mean, sometimes when something is outrageous, let's remember, the job of this envoy is to fight anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is an outrage. It's a moral outrage. It's a human sickness. You can't be diplomatic when talking about this outrage. You've got to be sometimes undiplomatic when talking about it. And so, that's what I would like to see in my successor.
Excellent.
Yes, Elan, you inspire so many of us. And at the Brandeis Center, we work with students, particularly also with law students who we educate and we train. We have a program, not only do we have law school chapters, but we have a special program that we call our Jigsaw Fellowship, which is our justice initiative guiding student activists worldwide, where we teach them these laws, how to use the law to combat anti-Semitism, so that they can then use these tools and these skills to be able to assist others. And so we end up with students who are very interested in ultimately being able to somehow engage in civil rights work and in combating anti-Semitism as part of their professional work, whether it is actually the primary work that they do, or even on the side if they're doing. And one question, or I've received a variation of this question from numerous students, is what kind of advice would you have? And I give it to you, and I'll even also ask Ken to maybe help address this. If there are law students who are interested in doing this work, are there opportunities at the State Department, in your office, Ken, in the Department of Education, or other ways? How can they get involved? How can they try and do this work as a career?
Oh my goodness, plenty of opportunities. First of all, the State Department takes interns. That's the quickest and easiest way to make a difference in this area. Apply for an internship. It can be pretty quick. And so we take interns. Second of all, you can come work for us. We have civil servants. You don't have to be a foreign service officer posted around the world. We have civil servants that that do the work day to day. They do the heavy lifting to do the diplomacy of the United States. And I'm sure it's the same for the Department of Education. I also think that getting involved with civil society, I mean, there are so many organizations that are doing, groundbreaking work. Incredible work. The Brandeis Center is one of them. Look, think about the Jigsaw Fellows. Every kid I ever met who goes to law school wants to make a difference, right? They want to make the world a better place. That's why I became a lawyer, and then, they go into corporate law, and which is great. I don't knock it. I did that, by the way. I was at a big New York firm, but then they say, well, it's kind of, I had all these ideals and now I'm doing this, and they're both good, but I kind of miss, well, here you're paving a path for law students to really capture that essence of what lawyers can do, to make the world a better place. And so they won't stop doing that after law school. The training you're giving them will allow them to be lay leaders later. So even if they're doing corporate work, or even if they're in finance, or even if they can still make a difference for their community, for the Jewish people, by providing much needed legal work and legal guidance to students and to world Jewish communities that desperately need it. So there's the Brandeis Center. There's also incredible organizations like Stand With Us, Hasbara Fellowship, APAC, that are really doing incredible work. And so I guess the message is, whether you come work for us or the Department of Education, or you get involved in the Brandeis Center or others, there are so many paths where you can have a deep and lasting influence on your campus, on your community, on your city, on your country. And so whatever it is you're doing, whatever job you pick, what I would say is always, always make time for that tikkun olam, that real tikkun olam, that is, giving of ourselves to make our world better.
Thank you.
So thanks for mentioning the Brandeis Center. Of course, we also have internships and law clerkships, summer law clerkships, fellowships, et cetera. The Department of Education is frequently hiring, not just in Washington, D.C., but in 12 different cities around the United States. Certainly was on a significant hiring spree over the last 2 years or so. It changes from year to year. There has been an organized campaign by various groups to urge the incoming administration to substantially increase the budget of the U.S. Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights. And since the overwhelming majority of the OCR budget goes to personnel, that means there is a push to expand hiring. So there could well be opportunities. OCR doesn't always hire at the entry level from recent law graduates, but it sometimes does. And when it is not hiring for recent, it looks highly on clerkships. It looks highly on experience that is pertinent, like what we do. Looks highly at people who have demonstrated an interest in the sorts of things that the agency does, and people who develop pertinent skills. So for those who are interested in working in civil rights as lawyers, there are lots of opportunities both in nonprofit sector and in government.
Right. I also put into the chat box our general information email address at the Brandeis Center, info@brandeiscenter.com. So if there are students who are either interested in our Jigsaw Fellowship program or our internship program, please reach out to us, and we'll be happy to talk to you. This has really been wonderful. I thank you, Elan. I wish you continued strength and success in everything that you do. We're here, we're cheering you on. We're behind you, and very grateful for your service, for the work that you've done, and for the time that you've spent with us this evening.
It's been a pleasure. And let me wish you, Elisa, and you, Ken, and all of our viewers a Chanukah Sameach. May the spirit of this holiday inspire all of us to fight anti-Semitism and to fight for the Jewish future.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Be well.